Hello guys, in this tutorial we will talk about if statements in Python. So let's get to it. So if a statement is a very fundamental concept, not only in Python programming, but in programming in general, because that's basically how you teach computers to make decisions for you in some sense, okay? So in plain English, again, if a statement, this is how computers can make decisions. Okay, so if statements in Python, they are very simple. The syntax is very easy to understand. So let's just jump into the syntax. Okay, so then the basic syntax of an if statement in Python is the following. So you start with the if statement, which is a keyword, and then followed by a condition. Okay, so this is gonna be a logical condition. It's gonna be a logical condition which is either going to be true or false. True or false. Okay, then after that, notice something important here. You have the dots. That's part of the syntax. Okay, so you have if space, the logical condition, then column, and then after that you will have this that I write it as a code block, and that's the code that is gonna get executed. Okay, so this is code to be executed. Executed if the logical condition is true. Okay, also notice the indentation. Okay, so this is very important. You need to make sure that you indent the code that you're planning to execute if the logical condition is true. Because if you don't have the proper indentation, you will run into error messages, okay? And that's basically it. That's if statements in Python. So you start with the keyword if, followed by a condition, column, and then the code that is going to be executed. Don't forget about indentation there. So here we have a very simple example that shows how you can use if statements in Python. So then, for example, here you have x is equal to 5. So you are assigning, or we are assigning the value of 5 to x. And then here is the if statement. So if x is greater than 0, then print x is positive. So this is just a very simple example that highlights how you can use if statement. So then, and in this case, you will see in the output of the code, right? So, or in the console, so you will see x is positive. Why is that? Because when you run or when you execute this logical comparison, right? X is greater than 0, and in our case, x is 5. So then this is going to be true. And because that is true, then this line will get executed. Okay, so that's a very simple example. Now let's talk about else. Okay, the else clause. So then basically, if you have, or if you are running into a scenario that it could be two options, right? So in that case, or if you have two alternatives, so then you may consider using the if-else statement. So then here is the basic syntax. So you start with if. It is the condition that is going to be executed. And that condition, again, the condition could be either true or false. Okay. So if it's true, so then this will get executed. Now, if you want to do something else in the case that the condition is false, that's when you need to bring else. Okay, so if that condition is false, so then now this new code or this new block of code will get executed. So that's basically how you use if and else statement. So again, in the previous case, we just use if the condition. If that condition is true, execute this. But there may be other scenarios in which you want to execute something if the condition is true and something else if the condition is false. So if that is the case, then you need to consider if and else statements. Okay, and that's basically the syntax that you need to use for that. Also, when you're using the if and else statement, notice that the column here, that's also part of the syntax. And again, indentation matters. Okay, so here is a very simple example that shows how you use if and else statement. So then here we say x is equal to -3. If x is positive, then this gets executed, else this gets executed. So in this case, when we are checking x is greater than 0, so that will return false. So then that means that this line right here is not going to get executed. On the other hand, this line right here is the one that will get executed. So then the final output that we see will be non-positive. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the else if statement. Again, first we start. Let's review what we covered so far. So first we start with the if condition, right? If condition, if that is true, execute this. Then we go into if this is true, execute this. If this is false, then execute something else. So that's if else. But then now if you have more options, right? And that will be what if, you know, the condition may be not only a true and false, but it may be broken down into multiple options. Okay. So if that is the case, so then you may consider if else ifs. So, and here is the basic syntax. So then you start with if, then the condition to be evaluated. If that is true, this gets executed. Then it goes to else if that this condition gets evaluated, and if it's true, this gets executed. Then otherwise, this gets executed. Okay, so that's basically the syntax. Okay, again, don't forget the columns, that's part of the syntax, and don't forget about the indentation. All right, so here is a very simple example. So then here we start with x is equal to 0. So if x is greater than 0, then this gets executed. Now if x is equal to 0, if x is equal to 0, then this gets executed. Then else, so otherwise this gets executed. So in this case, so let's walk through the logic again. In this case, we're assigning the x equals to 0. So then first this statement will get evaluated. X is greater than 0, so then in that case it's false because 0 is not greater than 0. So then you move to the next one. Now here is 0 equal to 0, so that is true. So then this statement will get executed. So then at the end, what we will see as the output, it will be 0. Okay, so if you have multiple conditions that you want to check in sequence in some sense, you may consider if else if statements. Next, let's just briefly review what are the comparison and the logical operations. Okay, the comparison operators are double equal is for equality, exclamation mark followed by equality is to check not equal. This is greater than, less than, this is greater than or equal. This is the opposite. This is less than or equal. Okay, so these two right here are a little bit more flexible compared to greater than or less than. Okay, now logical operators. So here we have and that checks if both conditions must be true to return true. Then you have or, at least one of the conditions must be true, and then not. Okay, so those are the comparison and the logical operators that you need to keep in mind when you're working with if, else if, and so on. Here is just a very simple example that highlights how you can use logical operators. So then here we assign the value of 20 to h, and then we are comparing, we are checking if a given value for h happens to fall between 18 and 65. And if that is the case, then this will get printed. So then in this case, we will see a dot as the result, because this expression right here is true. This expression also is true, and then we have true and true that returns true. Okay, we can also have nested if statement. So then you can have an if statement inside of an if statement. Okay, and depending on the complexity of the problem that you're working on, so this is also another option. Okay, so here we start with x is equal to 42, and if x is greater than 0, and then here is checking for the modulus operator if x modulus 2 is equal to 0, meaning that if x is an even number, because this is checking for the remainder. So if the remainder of dividing the value x by 2 is equal to 0, so then this gets executed. Okay, so this is also, again, depending on the complexity of the task that you're working on, that's also another option. You can have an if statement inside of an if statement, and you can also have something like if condition again, and then here if another condition, and then if another condition, and so on. So then it all depends on how complex the task is. Okay, but that's possible. A couple of common pitfalls that you need to keep in mind when you start working with if statements is that number one is the indentation is important. Okay, so make sure you properly indent the statements. Second, don't forget the column. That's also part of the syntax. Okay, it is very, very important. If you forget the column, or if you don't properly indent your statements, you're going to run into error messages. And the last one is the conditions that you place after the if statement or after the else if statement. They have to be either true or false. Those are the only two options, okay? Otherwise, again, you may run into error messages. In conclusion, the if statement is essential for writing decision-making logic in Python. Not only in Python, but again, in any programming language, if statements is very, very fundamental. Okay, all right, so then that's basically what I have for if, else if statements. Okay, so now let's jump into a couple of exercises that it will highlight how to use if, else if, and else statements in Python. So let's get to it. All right, so now here I have 5 exercises that will practice some of the concepts that we just covered with if and else statements in Python. So let's start with exercise number 1. Says write the program that asks the user to input a number and prints whether it's positive, negative, or 0. Okay. So let's start with that. So we can do something as follows. So then let's start with the logic first. So let's say the number is x. So if x is greater than 0, then we will print x is positive. Then else if else x, if it's less than 0, then we print this negative, and then else we print x is 0. Okay, So this is just a very simple if, else if, and else statements. But then now let's add one more line of code that basically it will prompt the user to enter to enter a value for x. Okay, so x will be equal to input. Okay, so we're gonna make it, let's make it just general. So input, enter a number. So it will be here. We can do it in this fashion. Yeah, I think this should work. So yeah, so as you can see here on the top, it prompts me to enter the value. So let's say if I enter 5. All right, so let's see what happens. So then it came up to be, okay, so what is complaining is because the way that I define x to be is being treated as a string. Okay, so what I need to do, I need to force this to be, for example, a float. And now let's try one more time. Oops, I forgot one parenthesis. Now if I enter 5, now I see that I get x is positive. Okay, yeah, because what was happening before is the way that I was defining x as an input, it was treating that as a string, and then it was complaining that it cannot compare a string with a value. So but then now it works. So then let's try a couple of other instances. So then now let's say it's negative 2.5 and it says x is negative. Let's run it one more time. Now if I enter 0, it says x is 0. Okay. All right, so then now let's go to the next exercise. It says write a Python script that checks if a number is even or odd. So very similar. So let's start with the if first. So if x mod 2 is equal to 0, then column and then print x is even. Else it is odd. Okay, and now here what I'm going to do is something similar. So x, now in this case I'm gonna use int just to make sure that it's an integer, right? Because only integers can be even or odd. So let's run this. Now if I enter 1, I'm supposed to see x is odd. Now if I run it one more time, now I'm going to enter 8. Now I see x is even. Okay, so yeah, so this highlights how you can use if and else statements. Okay, let's go to the next exercise. So then here we need to do the following. So ask the user age, the user for their age, and classify as child, teenager, or adult. So this is the case in which we will use if, else if statement, similar to what we did on the first exercise. Okay, so we start with if age is less than 13. So then we say you're a child. If x less than 20, so we say teenager. Else, forget the column here, and then you are an adult. So age equals to enter your age. So if my age in my case is 38, so you are an adult. So if I rerun this as, I don't know, let's say is 15, so it will be teenager. So this is one option. Okay, we can also try something as follows. So if age equals to input, enter your age. Now if age less than 13, you're a child, and then we can do it instead of just doing that, we can also do if age is so it will be age greater than equal than 14 and age less than equal, well, in this case is 13 here, is greater than equal than 13 and less than 19, you're a teenager, and then else you're an adult. So if I run that now, if I enter, for example, 19, it will still be teenager. If I run this, I don't know, 22, it will be an adult. And then for 10, it will be a child. Okay, so this is another option using and here instead of just doing this. Exercise 4, so we need to write a program that checks whether a number is divisible by 3 and 5. Okay, all right, so let's start with if number modulus 3 equals to 0 and number modulus 5 equals to 0 as well, then we print the number is divisible by both 3 and 5. Else the number is not divisible. Okay, now here let's use the input again. Number equals to int, input, enter the number. Okay, so if I run this and if I enter 15, I should get the number is divisible by 3 and 5. Now if I enter 17, it's not divisible. And if I enter 30, it is divisible. Okay, so finally the last exercise is asking us to, given a score between 0 and 100, assign a letter grade using this logic. Okay, all right, so let's start with if grade is less than 60, then it's gonna be print F. So your grade is F. Then else if grade is less than 70, then your grade is D. Then if your grade is less than 80, it's a C. If it's less than 90, it's a B. Else is an A. Okay, so and then here I say grade equals to that. So if I run this, and let's say I have an 82 as my grade, so it's a B. I run this one more time, let's say now it's a 93, so that will be an A. So that's one option, and then we can rewrite these statements in a very similar fashion as we did here. You can also do that. Okay, but that's basically in essence how you can use if and else statements. Don't forget the semicolons, don't forget the indentation. Yeah, and that's how you use if and else if statements in Python. Very important to teach computers, or to teach computers how to make decisions for you. Okay, so that's all I have for this video. See you on the next one.